Hello everyone, my name is Jackilyn Ammons. This is my Anthropology 278 final project, and my topic of choice for this project was racism and the Ku Klux Klan in Oregon. Where it all started. The great state of Oregon was adopted into the country on February 14th, 1859. Just 62 years later, the first Klansmen entered our state in the year 1921, and the KKK movement swept quickly across the state, gaining more than 35,000 members in just 3 years. The KKK took hold of Oregon quickly because their values were something that were already deeply entrenched in Oregon culture. At their core, the KKK was racist, anti-immigrant, and religiously discriminatory. They wanted the country to be only white, Anglo-Saxon Americans of Christian faith, which was a prominent ideology in Oregon well before the 1920s. So, as I said, racism in Oregon came well before the KKK. In 1844, before Oregon was even a state, all black people were banned from the territory, including slaves. Slave owners were given 3 years to sell, trade, or move their slaves. In 1850, it was declared that no people of color except half Indians were allowed to hold land, and those that already did had it taken from them. In 1857, when Oregon's Constitution was drafted for Oregon's inauguration into the country, it included a line that explained no free Negro or mulatto not residing in this state at the time of the adoption of this Constitution shall ever come, reside, or be within this state, or hold any real estate, or make any contact, or maintain any suit therein. Which basically means that there was no black people or people with any black blood in them allowed in the state after this Constitution was adopted. So in 1859, Oregon was adopted as the first and only all-white state in the United States of America. The second KKK sweeping the nation. The first incarnation of the KKK is what most people think of when we say KKK. It's the extremely violent, intense, horrifying things that happened pre-Civil War. However, that version of the KKK was ended during Reconstruction. And it was also only really prominent in the East, and particularly in the Southeast in the years prior to and during the Civil War. So this incarnation of the KKK died during Reconstruction, which was the period after the Civil War when the U.S. was getting all of its states back into the Union. The second KKK was the one that began reaching the entire country. This KKK was significantly more subtle and integrated into daily life, and it is also the one that reached our great state of Oregon. This version of the KKK had a lot of focus in politics, and they even hosted events and sponsored baseball teams like this one pictured here. This incarnation of the KKK was actually relatively small in the southeastern part of the country, where the original KKK was very large. This second KKK took the most hold in Indiana and here in Oregon. This KKK was also very short-lived, especially in comparison to the first, because corruption and World War II kind of took hold of the country, and everyone was quite horrified by the happenings during World War II over in Germany, which significantly decreased the buy-in to the Ku Klux Klan here in the States. So, as I said previously, this KKK had significant interest in politics, and they certainly wanted to further their power here in Oregon in that way. So as they came to Oregon, they immediately started trying to get as many Klansmen in office as possible. In 1922, just 1 year after the first Klansman arrived, Walter Pierce, who was a very prominent Ku Klux Klan member, was elected governor, and various other Klansmen were elected as other state and local officers. After these elections, various discriminatory bills were passed, such as a bill requiring children to attend public school, which was aimed at the Catholic faith as it would remove private Catholic schooling. Another was blocking public school from using civics and history textbooks that spoke ill of the Founding Fathers or other quote-unquote American heroes. And they also passed laws forcing teachers not to wear religious garb at the school, and other laws which barred aliens, mostly looking toward Japanese immigrants, from holding land. So the Ku Klux Klan had significant social and cultural influence here in Oregon, and they had quite an easy time integrating into the daily lives of Oregonians due to Oregon's pre-existing culture. However, since there were simply not enough people of color in Oregon to create a big uproar as the previous Ku Klux Klan had done, they started a bigger focus on immigrants. The majority of immigrants were Jewish or Catholic, so they mixed anti-immigration and pro-Protestantism in order to create a group of bad guys. They focused on recruiting ministers in Oregon in order to spread the message through sermons. And as I previously discussed, they also put a big focus in politics so that they could influence people in that way as well. So the Ku Klux Klan, unfortunately, also had great ties here in our very own city of Eugene, Oregon. The first Klansman arrived here in Eugene in 1922. And the following day, an advertisement was released in the Eugene Morning Register announcing a lecture called The Truth About the Klan, where Klansmen wanted to recruit members. Many Klansmen in Eugene were young people that were more focused on the moral side as well as gaining support politically for the Ku Klux Klan. They helped in passing the Oregon school bill that I discussed previously that forced children to attend only public schools. And the Klan in Eugene began to deteriorate when some of the names of their members were released to the public. And this continued when even more members were exposed, and their numbers dropped even more significantly. As the 1920s wore on, many students and faculty at the University of Oregon resisted the push of the Klan, even when one of the professors came out as a Klan leader. When the Grand Dragon of Oregon himself removed his power, the Klan across Oregon, including the one in Eugene, began to completely fall apart. So, the aftermath into the present. Unfortunately, the Ku Klux Klan left behind some racist views here in Oregon. The neo-Nazi or skinhead movement started here sometime in the 1980s. According to Randy Blazek, a scientist who studies white supremacy in Oregon, this movement is alive and well in Portland and is a byproduct of Oregon's history of Ku Klux Klan members. This movement also thrives due to the incarceration rates in Oregon, because when a white person goes into the system, they find themselves in the minority and are often recruited into white supremacist gangs. According to Portland State University, African American families lag behind in health outcomes, employment rates, and high school graduation rates here in Oregon when compared to white families. A former Portlandian also compiled the experiences of people of color in Portland and found that most people had a hard time acclimating to the culture here, and it was also difficult to live here because there were so few faces that looked like them. According to the 2010 census, only about 30% of Oregon's population are people of color. So much of the material that we learned in this class fits well into this topic. For example, we learned that even the University of Oregon has a past entrenched in racism. For example, both Dunn and Dee Dee Halls were named after racist people. Frederick Dunn was the leader of Eugene's KKK for some time, and Dee Dee was a proponent of slavery. Luckily, the board decided to rename Dunn Hall. However, they did not rename Dee Dee, as he was found to have supported citizenship for slaves after the Civil War. Another example of racism in Oregon we learned in class was the situation with the wildlife refuge. Robinson put it well when he said that if these people had been black, they would have not been allowed to stay there peacefully. Moreover, the KKK in general used ideas from 18th and 19th century scientific racism to further their racist ideology, using scientific fact from these times to back up their thoughts, such as the hierarchy of racists. They believed that white people were naturally superior to people of color, and as we learned in class, this was stated well before the KKK, even as early as Aristotle. This movement continued with the eugenic movement, the belief that people of color having children with white people would deteriorate the race, something the Klan members perpetuated as well. So, to conclude, Oregon presents as a very open and liberal state, but it definitely has a dark past that is not very well known. If you ask most Oregonians, they would likely have no idea how horrible of a racist history that we do have. There has been great progress since the times of the Ku Klux Klan here in Oregon, but there's always room for more progress. The violence and undermining of people of color continues to this day, and we need to work toward completely removing these issues. The best way to improve our state is to encourage a more diverse community and give better support to people of color. And here you can see many references that I used throughout these slides written out. Here are some more. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.